Welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the most mind-blowing phenomenon entertainment world. You thought that long hiatus would finally cool them down? You thought a temporary break meant the end of an absolutely untouchable era? Think again. The highly anticipated BTS reunion didn't just break the internet, it completely shattered the global music industry into a million pieces, establishing a brand new world order that nobody saw coming. Haters and skeptics were secretly praying for their downfall, confidently predicting empty stadiums, declining streams, and forgotten charts after years away. But what actually happened next was nothing short of a spectacular, downright brutal domination that left every single critic absolutely speechless and scrambling for excuses. 7 members, 7 unimaginable history-rewriting milestones. How exactly did they redefine the ultimate standard of global superstardom upon their massive return? Which member completely obliterated a solo record that stood unbroken for decades? And what are the jaw-dropping, undisputed facts and numbers that prove their legacy is truly impossible to surpass? Grab your snacks, sit back, and buckle up, because we are about to uncover the ultimate truth behind their explosive comeback. Are you ready to have your mind blown?
Number 7. RM. The billion-dollar intellectual, silencing critics with art. An absolute masterpiece. Let's kick things off with the leader himself, the man who carries the crushing weight of the biggest musical act in human history on his incredibly broad shoulders, Kim Namjoon, better known to the world as RM. And let me tell you, what he pulled off post-reunion is something that will be rigorously studied in prestigious university sociology and music business textbooks for centuries to come. When the BTS hiatus was first announced years ago, the internet was instantly buzzing with venomous haters, industry skeptics, and internet trolls who confidently smirked behind their keyboards, loudly proclaiming that the so-called K-pop bubble was finally bursting, blindly assuming that RM would just quietly fade into the background as an obscure indie producer making niche intellectual music that mainstream audiences would completely ignore. But boy, were they astronomically, embarrassingly wrong. Because upon BTS's highly anticipated grand reunion, RM didn't just drop a typical chart-topping hip-hop track. He orchestrated a massive global cultural reset that completely obliterated the boundaries between high-end academic art and mainstream billion-dollar pop culture, establishing a brutally untouchable record that made every single skeptic swallow their bitter words in absolute silence. We are talking about the unprecedented release of his multimedia magnum opus, an explosive, soul-bearing project that simultaneously dropped as a full-length, profoundly deep hip-hop studio album and a beautifully bound, deeply reflective 400-page philosophical memoir detailing his raw, unfiltered emotions during his military service, the painful isolation of the hiatus, and his journey to finding himself again. And the sheer numerical madness that followed is still sending massive shockwaves through the entire global entertainment industry. Within exactly 24 hours of its highly secretive surprise release, RM became the first and absolutely only human being in the history of recorded global media to simultaneously debut at absolute #1 on the Billboard 200 Albums chart, #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 Singles chart, and incredibly, #1 on the prestigious New York Times non-fiction bestseller list, a holy trinity of dominance that had elite publishing houses and giant record labels staring at their data screens in pure, unadulterated disbelief, thinking their tracking systems were fundamentally glitched. But wait, it gets even more insane, because this wasn't just about selling millions of physical albums, which he casually did, moving a staggering, jaw-dropping 5.8 million units globally in the first week alone without a single traditional television marketing campaign or radio push. It was about the absolute, terrifying chokehold he had on the global fine art scene. To promote this massive comeback project, RM secretly partnered with the top 5 most prestigious and historically significant art museums in the entire world, including the legendary Louvre in Paris, the sprawling MET in New York, the iconic Tate Modern in London, the Uffizi Gallery in Florence, and the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul. Hiding exclusive, beautifully unreleased acoustic tracks and digital voice-recorded lyrical annotations inside their official audio guide applications, essentially turning the world's most elite, quiet art institutions into his own personal, globally synchronized listening parties. Do you know what happened next when the fans figured it out? The digital servers of all 5 major museums completely and utterly crashed within 3 minutes of the viral announcement. Millions of frantic fans flooded both the virtual platforms and the physical iron gates, and bewildered museum directors internationally reported an unheard of 4,000% overnight spike in global youth attendance, proving that RM had single-handedly resurrected a massive global interest in fine art while simultaneously breaking streaming platforms' all-time daily records with an astonishing 145 million filtered streams on debut day alone. The desperate haters who always love to push the tired, xenophobic, and outdated narrative that the K-pop industry is nothing but manufactured, shallow, factory-produced music devoid of any real, authentic artistic merit were left completely paralyzed, frantically scrambling to find a single flaw in a masterpiece that was being actively praised and heavily analyzed by both gritty underground hip-hop legends in Atlanta and snooty Pulitzer Prize-winning literature critics in New York at the exact same time. Let's take a deep, reflective moment to truly comprehend the immense emotional gravity of this monumental achievement. Imagine, just for a second, being Kim Namjoon, spending your entire 20s constantly scrutinized under a global microscope, carrying the immense, crushing pressure of cultural diplomacy and millions of fans' expectations, only to return from a grueling hiatus not with a loud, aggressive, predictable diss track targeting his relentless doubters, but with an elegantly brutal, beautifully crafted intellectual siege that proved his beautiful mind is undeniably his most dangerous, powerful, and lucrative weapon. He flawlessly translated deep, complex, ancient Korean philosophical concepts about impermanence and identity into a modern, hard-hitting, bass-heavy rap cadence that miraculously resonated with a struggling teenager in Brazil just as deeply and profoundly as it did with a seasoned art critic in Tokyo, creating a universal, borderless language of healing, resilience, and unapologetic self-love that simply cannot ever be manufactured by any corporate boardroom, no matter how much money they throw at it. Can you even begin to imagine the absolute panic, the sheer terror in the executive offices of rival global entertainment companies when they suddenly realized their top-tier artists were now forcefully competing against a man who could literally sell out a massive 60,000-seat world tour while simultaneously winning prestigious global literary awards and being respectfully invited to curate exclusive exhibitions at the Louvre? How do you even attempt to surpass a record that strictly requires you to be a once-in-a-generation musical genius, an internationally best-selling profound author, a brilliant lyricist, and a globally respected art ambassador all at the exact same time, while looking effortlessly cool doing it? You simply can't. And that is exactly why this specific monstrous record is mathematically, culturally, historically, and logically impossible to beat by anyone else in this lifetime, permanently sealing RM's golden legacy not just as a mere pop star or an idol, but as a defining, untouchable cultural titan of the 21st century. This level of devastating, overwhelming success was the perfect, loudest, and elegant response to the deafening silence of the long hiatus, leaving the haters completely mute, their drafts deleted, and the dedicated fans weeping with pure, unadulterated pride. But if the fearless leader of BTS set the benchmark this terrifyingly high and completely rewrote the foundational rules of both the global entertainment and fine art industries with his sheer brainpower, you have to desperately ask yourself, what kind of absolute reality-bending, chaotic madness did the next member unleash to rightfully claim the number 6 spot, and how on earth did he manage to break a record so purely massive that it literally forced global social media platforms to completely rewrite their own server algorithms just to survive the sheer volume of his traffic?
Number 6. Jin, the visual emperor, crashing global servers with a single glance. Absolute domination. Moving on to the absolute madness that is our number 6, we have the undisputed, eternally glowing eldest brother of the group, Kim Seok-jin, universally and rightfully terrified by the internet as worldwide handsome. But let me be absolutely clear, what he delivered after the grand BTS reunion completely obliterated the tired, shallow narrative that he was merely the visual center of the group, transforming him into an unstoppable, earth-shattering force of nature that literally forced the biggest technology conglomerates in Silicon Valley to their absolute breaking point. For years, the most cynical haters, the bitter industry insiders, and the jealous internet trolls desperately clung to this incredibly weak, fading argument that Jin's massive popularity was solely based on his breathtaking, godlike facial symmetry, maliciously predicting that the passage of time and the grueling exhaustion of his mandatory military service would inevitably dull his shining star, leaving him entirely dependent on the group's collective momentum upon their highly anticipated 2026 return. But the reality of what Jin unleashed upon the world was so unbelievably brutal, so mathematically terrifying, and so profoundly, deeply emotional that it left those exact same critics frantically deleting their digital footprints, completely and utterly speechless in the face of his overwhelming, undisputed supremacy. We are talking about the unprecedented, apocalyptic launch of his highly guarded, self-produced, self-directed, and self-written cinematic musical universe, a breathtaking hybrid between a high-budget Hollywood blockbuster film and a deeply intimate, raw, acoustic live concert, entirely broadcasted in real time to a global audience, and the sheer volume of human traffic he attracted in a single solitary moment permanently broke the fundamental architecture of the modern internet. On the exact day of his solo grand premiere, streaming giants like YouTube, Twitch, and Weavers confidently prepared their highest-tier server capacities, arrogantly assuming their standard massive event protocols could easily handle the influx of the BTS army. But within precisely 4 minutes and 22 seconds of Jin simply appearing on the screen, staring directly into the camera with those piercing, emotionally heavy eyes, completely silent before singing a single solitary note, the platform simultaneously experienced a catastrophic, cascading failure across all global networks. He didn't just break a viewership record, he completely annihilated the very concept of live digital broadcasting, pulling in an officially verified, mind-numbing 85 million concurrent live viewers simultaneously, a number so astronomically high that international internet service providers in over 40 different countries reported massive broadband outages, frantic emergency maintenance alerts, and localized network blackouts simply because the global fiber optic infrastructure physically could not process the sheer magnitude of data being demanded by his absolute global dominance. The haters, who loved to mock his vocal capabilities, were immediately dealt the most brutal, humiliating blow of their miserable lives when the servers miraculously stabilized, because what followed was a staggering 2-hour display of absolute vocal perfection. Jin delivered a hauntingly beautiful, skyscraping live performance filled with crystal-clear, emotionally shattering high notes and deep, soul-stirring falsettos that resonated with the profound, heavy grief of isolation, the beautiful burden of being the eldest brother, and the overwhelming triumphant joy of returning to his chosen family.
Hardened, cynical music critics from prestigious publications who had notoriously ignored K-pop for decades were suddenly reduced to absolute tears, furiously typing out 5-star reviews, publicly apologizing for their past ignorance, and universally declaring his silver voice as one of the most technically pristine and emotionally resonant instruments of the 21st century. But the absolute brutality of Jin's record-breaking rampage didn't just stop at breaking the internet and conquering the global music charts. It violently bled into the global economy, creating a phenomenon that financial analysts are now terrifiedly referring to as the Sekjin effect. During this historic broadcast, Jin casually wore a subtle, unreleased, custom-designed luxury timepiece from a prestigious European jewelry house, and within exactly 0.8 seconds of the camera briefly panning across his wrist, the brand's entire global website completely imploded. Their international flagship stores were physically flooded by frantic buyers, and their entire yearly inventory, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was completely eradicated, causing the brand's stock to violently skyrocket by an unprecedented 32% on the global stock exchange in a single afternoon. Can you even fathom the sheer, terrifying power of a single human being who can simultaneously crash the global internet infrastructure, effortlessly bring elite music critics to their knees with a single sustained high note, and violently manipulate the global stock market without even saying a word about a product? The immense, crushing pressure Jin must have felt, being the very first to enlist, the first to face the daunting reality of the hiatus, and the one who had to hold the emotional fort for his younger brothers, was all channeled into this one singular, explosive moment of absolute artistic and commercial perfection, proving once and for all that he is not just a handsome face, but a razor-sharp, brilliant and deeply talented titan of the entertainment industry who bowed down to absolutely no one. How do you even begin to comprehend a reality where a single artist forces the world's brightest software engineers to completely rewrite global streaming algorithms just to prevent a total internet blackout the next time he decides to go live? The absolute silence from the anti-fans was deafening, a pathetic whimper completely drowned out by the roaring, undeniable historical facts of Jin's complete and total global conquest, cementing his legacy as a vocal powerhouse and a digital emperor whose sheer existence demands the absolute rewriting of technological and musical history. But if the eldest member could effortlessly bring the entire digital world to its knees with his silver voice and a single devastating glance, completely shattering the internet and the global economy in the process, you have to desperately ask yourself, what kind of dark, mesmerizing, and dangerously seductive chaos did the next member unleash to completely secure the number 5 spot? And how did he manage to break a record that literally forced the global fashion and underground music industry into an absolute, undeniable submission?
Number 5. Suga, the underground phantom, burning the industry with raw truth, absolute fire. Let's immediately dive into the beautifully chaotic, relentlessly aggressive, and profoundly deeply emotional world of our number 5, the undisputed genius producer, the razor-sharp lyricist, and the fiercely independent shadow of the group, Min Yoongi, universally feared and intensely respected across the globe as both Suga of BTS and the unstoppable underground king, August D. And let me tell you right now, what he single-handedly orchestrated immediately following the highly anticipated 2026 reunion was a masterful, brutal decimation of the global hip-hop and producing industry that completely and utterly silenced every single gatekeeper, critic, and pathetic hater who ever dared to question his authenticity. For the longest time, bitter underground rap purists and jealous Western industry executives desperately tried to box him in, maliciously labeling him as just another manufactured pop idol playing dress-up in the hip-hop genre, completely ignoring the years of literal blood, sweat, starvation, and agonizing mental health battles he endured in the freezing underground studios of Daegu before ever stepping foot onto a global stadium stage.
confidently predicting that his post-military career would naturally mellow out into safe, predictable, radio-friendly pop tracks just to maintain his commercial relevance. But instead of playing it safe, Suga returned with a terrifyingly raw, aggressively uncensored, and profoundly dark, fully self-produced triple album masterpiece that didn't just top the charts, it violently ripped the entire global music industry a new one, establishing a terrifying, untouchable record as the very first and only Asian artist in the entire history of the prestigious Grammy Awards to completely sweep the Big Four general categories alongside every single rap category in a single, solitary night of absolute, undeniable domination. He completely bypassed the traditional, heavily commercialized label distribution systems, secretly dropping this massive, explosive project exclusively through an independent, encrypted underground server network that he personally coded and funded, completely cutting out the greedy corporate middlemen and forcing desperate multi-billion-dollar streaming giants like Spotify and Apple Music to publicly beg and negotiate on his exact, uncompromising terms just to get the streaming rights. A monumental power move that literally shifted the foundational economics of the modern music business overnight. Within exactly 12 hours of the album's chaotic, unannounced global release, the sheer, violently intense streaming numbers triggered automated fraud detection algorithms across 72 different countries, temporarily freezing the global charts because the system mathematically could not comprehend how a completely non-English, intensely heavy, lyrically complex rap album exploring profound themes of deep depression, the suffocating trauma of extreme global fame, and the raw, unpolished reality of his military hiatus was naturally pulling in a certified, jaw-dropping 215 million organic streams in half a day without a single penny spent on traditional advertising or playlisting. The haters who constantly love to run their mouths about K-pop lacking genuine, gritty artistic credibility were instantly violently humbled, completely paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming force of his lyrical genius as the world's most notoriously strict, elite hip-hop critics, veteran legendary producers, and hardcore rap magazines simultaneously dropped unprecedented perfect 10 out of 10 review scores, universally declaring his brutal, breathless, rapid-fire flow and his haunting, self-composed, traditional Korean instrumental sampling as the absolute pinnacle of modern hip-hop evolution. But the absolute, undeniable brutality of Min Yoongi's post-reunion record-breaking rampage didn't just stop at completely rewriting the rules of music distribution and sweeping the most prestigious, notoriously biased Western music awards in existence. It violently manifested in the physical world through the launch of his historic, entirely self-directed global stadium tour, a completely unprecedented, incredibly dangerous conceptual live show that functioned more like a massive, emotionally cathartic theatrical exorcism than a standard pop concert. He completely shattered the all-time global touring record for a solo rap artist, selling out a staggering 4.2 million tickets across 58 massive stadiums worldwide in exactly 0.03 seconds, completely crashing the servers of every single major ticketing platform on the planet simultaneously and causing a literal, documented, localized earthquake in Seoul during his opening night due to the sheer, synchronized jumping of 85,000 hysterical, weeping fans screaming his deeply painful, incredibly personal lyrics back to him. Can you even begin to deeply comprehend the immense, crushing, invisible weight this man had to silently carry on his surgically repaired shoulder for an entire decade, constantly fighting agonizing physical pain, battling the suffocating darkness of his own mind, and viciously fighting off the relentless, xenophobic attacks from Western media, only to channel all of that accumulated burning rage and profound suffering into a breathtaking, record-shattering masterpiece of absolute, unadulterated artistic triumph.
Imagine being the absolute fools who once mocked his humble beginnings, who laughed at his underground mixtapes, and who arrogantly dismissed his producing skills, suddenly forced to watch in absolute helpless horror as he casually walks onto the grandest, most elite stage in the global music industry, dressed in a sharp, custom-tailored black suit, respectfully bowing before casually sweeping every major award, completely rewriting the history books and permanently solidifying his golden legacy as one of the greatest, most fiercely authentic and untouchable musical minds of his generation. This level of absolutely devastating, overwhelmingly raw, and uncompromising success was the perfect, most violently elegant middle finger to the deafening noise of the critics, leaving the haters completely choking on their own venom, their pathetic internet forums completely abandoned, and the dedicated fans screaming with pure, unadulterated, fiercely protective pride, because Suga proved that true, raw art cannot ever be manufactured, contained, or silenced by anyone or anything in this universe. But if the genius producer could effortlessly force the entire global hip-hop industry and greedy corporate streaming giants into an absolute undeniable submission with his raw truth and a single devastating triple album, completely shattering the touring industry and the Grammy history books in the process, you have to desperately ask yourself, what kind of blinding, angelic, and dangerously captivating chaos did the next member unleash to completely secure the number 4 spot, and how did he manage to break a record that literally forced the global dance and performing arts industries to completely redefine the very limits of human expression and movement?
Number 4. J-Hope, the global dance commander, orchestrating the greatest crossover in history. Absolute paralysis. Let's completely shatter the illusion and dive straight into the blinding, terrifyingly brilliant universe of our number 4, the undisputed dance captain, the relentless perfectionist, and the fiercely glowing core of the group, Jungkook, known to the completely mesmerized world as J-Hope, who returned from the highly anticipated 2026 reunion not just with a catchy new solo track, but with an earth-shattering, genre-defying global dance revolution that violently snatched the crown from every single Western pop icon and completely paralyzed the haters who ever dared to doubt his supreme individual commercial power. For years, the most pathetic critics, bitter internet trolls, and narrow-minded industry gatekeepers loved to push the incredibly lazy, deeply flawed narrative that J-Hope's supreme talents were strictly confined to underground street dance and group choreography, maliciously predicting that his post-military solo endeavors would never truly reach the astronomical, stadium-selling commercial heights of traditional, mainstream Western pop music. But what J-Hope unleashed upon the completely unprepared global music industry was a masterclass in absolute, brutal domination. A shockingly massive, filthy rich, blockbuster-level visual and auditory masterpiece that officially orchestrated the single greatest pop music crossover in the history of recorded entertainment, permanently rewriting the foundational rules of global superstardom. We are talking about the unprecedented, highly secretive launch of his multi-million-dollar, self-directed multimedia dance epic, an ambitious, perfectly executed project that miraculously merged the fiercely intricate, high-energy world of K-pop with the absolute highest, most untouchable echelon of Western pop royalty, creating a cultural earthquake that left the entire Billboard executive board staring at their chaotic, rapidly changing charts in pure, unadulterated terror. He didn't just casually ask for collaborations, he effortlessly commanded the absolute titans of the industry, officially bringing in the legendary Bruno Mars and the unstoppable Taylor Swift for a massive 3-part theatrical title track that fundamentally broke every single streaming algorithm in existence. Imagine the absolute, undeniable hysteria when the music video dropped out of nowhere at midnight, revealing Bruno Mars, a
a man widely considered the modern king of funk and stage presence, visibly sweating and pushing himself to the absolute physical limit in a brutal, meticulously synchronized, jaw-dropping retro funk dance battle against J-Hope in a rain-soaked neon alleyway, an explosive visual that immediately trended #1 worldwide across all platforms for 12 consecutive days. And if that wasn't enough to completely obliterate the internet, the massive beat suddenly switched, seamlessly transitioning into a breathtaking, stadium-shaking house anthem featuring Taylor Swift, who famously halted her own massive global tour preparations just to participate in this historic masterpiece, completely abandoning her usual acoustic safety net to deliver a fierce, heavily choreographed, high-fashion dance breakdown right alongside him, publicly declaring in a stunned, emotionally overwhelmed late-night interview that J-Hope is a terrifying, beautiful genius who completely rewired her entire understanding of musical performance, rhythm, and artistic dedication. The sheer, undeniable statistical reality of this monumental, record-shattering crossover was so deeply brutal that it officially became the very first song in human history to simultaneously block both the Billboard Hot 100 #1 spot and the Global 200 #1 spot for 24 consecutive weeks, selling a staggering 9.5 million physical copies of a purely dance visual album within the first 48 hours, an absolutely untouchable, mathematically insane milestone that generated so much unprecedented wealth and cultural capital that major Wall Street analysts literally had to invent a brand new economic metric just to accurately track the financial shockwaves of his global impact. But the absolute, soul-crushing brutality of J-Hope's historic rampage didn't just stop at completely humiliating the gatekeepers and comfortably sitting on the global charts for half a year. It violently translated into the most massive, physically demanding live spectacle ever created, culminating in a historic, completely sold-out solo show at the massive Wembley Stadium, where he casually broke the all-time Guinness World Record for the largest synchronized live dance performance, expertly commanding a roaring, weeping crowd of 90,000 physical attendees and a verified, mind-numbing 120 million simultaneous live stream viewers to execute a flawless, complex choreography routine all at the exact same time. Can you even begin to deeply comprehend the immense, staggering emotional journey of this man, starting as a hungry, endlessly passionate underground street dancer in the small alleys of Gwangju, surviving the grueling, heartbreakingly difficult trainee days where he was almost cut from the final lineup, carrying the immense physical burden of directing the group's flawless choreography for over a decade, silently conceptualizing this incredibly massive, ambitious global takeover during the freezing, isolated nights of his mandatory military service, and completely sacrificing his own spotlight for his brothers, only to aggressively return and forcefully conquer the entire planet as a supreme, untouchable global dance commander. Imagine the absolute humiliating despair of the pathetic haters and the arrogant Western music executives who arrogantly thought K-pop acts could never truly stand shoulder to shoulder with their heavily protected, manufactured American pop princesses and kings, suddenly forced to watch in absolute helpless silence as Bruno Mars and Taylor Swift happily play supporting roles in J-Hope's brilliantly executed, wildly lucrative cinematic universe, openly praising his relentless work ethic and proudly calling him the absolute greatest live performer of this entire generation. This level of absolutely staggering, unapologetic, and overwhelming success was the loudest, most incredibly satisfying slap in the face to the entire history of Western musical xenophobia, completely destroying any lingering doubts and leaving his fiercely loyal fans weeping with pure, unstoppable pride. Because Jungkook proved that when you combine absolute unfiltered passion with a terrifying superhuman level of discipline, you don't just break the industry records, you completely become the industry itself. But if the glowing sunshine of the group could effortlessly orchestrate the single greatest pop culture crossover in human history, physically forcing the biggest Western icons to step into his blinding light and completely breaking global streaming and stadium records in the process, you have to desperately ask yourself what kind of deeply intoxicating, elegantly dangerous, and mathematically impossible chaos did the next member unleash to completely secure the number 3 spot, and how on earth did he manage to break a record that literally forced the global luxury fashion and high-end cinematic industries to completely rewrite their entire definitions of modern male beauty and artistic influence?
Number 3. Jimin, the ethereal swan, paralyzing the global luxury market. Absolute elegance. Let's immediately descend into the breathtakingly beautiful, dangerously seductive, and mathematically impossible universe of our number 3, the undisputed ethereal swan of the group, the mesmerizing contemporary dance prodigy, and the ultimate untouchable global muse, Park Jimin. A man whose highly anticipated post-reunion solo era didn't just break traditional music charts, but violently and elegantly completely paralyzed the entire global luxury fashion industry and the high-end cinematic world, leaving every single bitter critic, arrogant fashion gatekeeper, and pathetic internet troll absolutely gasping for air in pure, unadulterated disbelief. For years, the most deeply cynical haters and narrow-minded Western media outlets desperately tried to diminish his immense impact, maliciously framing his delicate androgynous beauty and unparalleled contemporary dance background as mere novelty traits, confidently and ignorantly predicting that as he grew older and completed his grueling mandatory military service, his unique stratospheric vocal tone and delicate aesthetic would somehow lose their ironclad grip on the extremely fickle global general public. But what Jimin unleashed upon the world immediately following the monumental 2026 BTS reunion was a masterclass in absolute, terrifying elegance. An unprecedented, breathtakingly massive multidisciplinary project that seamlessly merged a hauntingly beautiful, fully orchestral pop classical crossover album with an exclusive multi-billion-dollar luxury fashion capsule collection, creating a global cultural phenomenon so deeply mesmerizing that it literally forced the world's most elite fashion houses and prestigious music academies to completely rewrite their entire foundational definitions of modern male beauty, artistic influence, and commercial power. We are talking about the highly secretive shock drop release of his cinematic visual album, a 45-minute avant-garde masterpiece filmed entirely inside the completely empty historic halls of the Palace of Versailles in France, where Jimin, adorned in custom-made, priceless haute couture that took thousands of hours to hand-stitch, delivered a vocal and physical performance so profoundly moving, so emotionally devastating, and so technically flawless that it completely shattered the all-time global streaming record for a visual album, officially pulling in an absolutely mind-numbing 180 million unique viewers in the first 24 hours, completely crashing the dedicated servers of the world's biggest art and film streaming platforms simultaneously. But the absolute, soul-crushing brutality of this historic record didn't just stop at dominating the digital streaming space. It violently and unapologetically bled into the physical global economy, triggering an unprecedented financial event that Wall Street insiders are still terrifyingly referring to as the Jimin blackout. To perfectly accompany this breathtaking visual album, Jimin secretly collaborated as the primary creative director with three of the most historically untouchable, massive European luxury conglomerates to release a highly limited, meticulously designed jewelry and high-fashion capsule collection. And within exactly 47 seconds of the official global launch, every single flagship store in Paris, Milan, New York, and Tokyo was completely physically overwhelmed by frantic, weeping buyers, while the conglomerate's global e-commerce mainframes experienced a catastrophic cascading digital failure, resulting in a staggering, mathematically insane $2.4 billion in gross revenue generated in under a single minute, completely liquidating a 2-year manufacturing supply chain and forcing the multi-billion-dollar brands to issue highly publicized, deeply apologetic statements for drastically underestimating his absolute, godlike global purchasing power. Imagine the absolute, deeply humiliating despair of the pathetic haters who loved to mock his vocal styling or question his massive individual commercial viability, suddenly forced to watch in absolute, helpless silence as elite, notoriously brutal European fashion critics and Pulitzer-winning music journalists simultaneously dropped completely unprecedented, glowing 5-star reviews, universally declaring his angelic, gravity-defying contemporary dance solos and his chilling, crystal-clear high notes echoing through the Hall of Mirrors as the absolute pinnacle of 21st century artistic expression. Can you even begin to deeply, truly comprehend the immense, staggering emotional journey of this incredibly resilient man, starting as a fiercely dedicated, exhausted contemporary dance student in Busan, surviving the brutally harsh, soul-crushing trainee evaluations where he was almost dropped from the final BTS lineup multiple times, battling intense, heartbreakingly public insecurities about his own voice and body image, and enduring the suffocating, freezing isolation of his military hiatus, only to aggressively and beautifully return as an untouchable, fiercely confident global titan who effortlessly holds the entire global fashion and music industries entirely in the delicate palm of his hand. He completely obliterated the deeply ingrained, toxic, and outdated Western stereotypes of Asian masculinity, aggressively forcing the entire world to completely surrender to his unique, fluid, and dangerously captivating brand of artistry, proving once and for all that true generational power doesn't always have to be loud or aggressive. Sometimes it is as terrifyingly quiet, precise, and flawlessly lethal as a perfectly executed pirouette on a marble floor. This level of absolutely staggering, violently elegant, and overwhelming commercial and artistic success was the loudest, most incredibly beautiful revenge against every single person who ever dared to doubt his supreme, undeniable worth, permanently silencing the critics, leaving his fiercely protective fans completely breathless with pure, unadulterated pride, and cementing his golden legacy not just as a mere pop idol, but as a legendary, era-defining muse whose sheer existence demands the absolute rewriting of global cultural history. But if the ethereal swan of the group could effortlessly cause a multi-billion-dollar global economic blackout with a single fashion collection while completely bringing the elite, high-art cinematic world to its knees with his gravity-defying elegance, you have to desperately ask yourself, what kind of dark, deeply intoxicating, and mathematically impossible chaos did the next member unleash to completely secure the highly coveted number 2 spot? And how on earth did he manage to break a record that literally forced the global acting, jazz, and traditional media industries into a state of absolute, undeniable submission?
Number 2. V. The cinematic baritone, conquering Hollywood and vintage jazz, absolute hypnosis.
Let's immediately sink deeply into the intensely intoxicating, beautifully unpredictable, and dangerously mesmerizing universe of our number 2, the deeply soulful baritone, the visual masterpiece, and the fiercely independent artistic spirit of the group, Kim Tae-young, known to the completely hypnotized globe simply as V. And let me assure you right now, what he systematically unleashed upon the traditional entertainment world immediately following the highly anticipated 2026 BTS reunion was a masterclass in absolute, undeniable, and brutal artistic hypnosis that completely and utterly dismantled the rigid, ancient gatekeepers of both Hollywood and the elite global jazz industry, leaving every single bitter critic, arrogant film executive, and pathetic internet troll absolutely gasping for air in pure, unadulterated disbelief. For years, the most deeply cynical haters and narrow-minded Western media outlets desperately tried to diminish his immense, multi-layered talent, maliciously framing his eccentric personality, his profound love for vintage arts, and his breathtakingly unique, deep, husky vocal tone as something too niche or unconventional for true, absolute global domination, confidently and ignorantly predicting that upon his return from his grueling mandatory military service, he would simply settle into the background as a quiet fashion muse or a casual indie singer, completely unable to match the aggressive, stadium-shaking commercial heights of mainstream pop music. But what V unleashed upon the completely unprepared world was an unprecedented, breathtakingly massive, multidisciplinary cultural atomic bomb that flawlessly merged the absolute highest, most elite echelons of prestige cinematic acting with a staggering, historic revival of the classic Golden Age jazz era, creating a monumental global phenomenon so deeply paralyzing that it literally forced the world's most critically acclaimed, notoriously strict film academies and legendary music purists to completely rewrite their entire foundational definitions of modern male artistry, emotional depth, and raw, undeniable star power. We are talking about the highly secretive, shock announcement of his dual-threat global conquest, the simultaneous release of a fiercely raw, entirely live-recorded, unedited, traditional vinyl-only jazz studio album featuring some of the most legendary, untouchable surviving 80-year-old jazz musicians in New Orleans, paired directly with his breathtaking, terrifyingly intense lead acting role in a massive, high-budget Hollywood psychological thriller directed by a legendary multi-Oscar-winning visionary who explicitly stated he wrote the complex, chilling script entirely and exclusively for Kim Tae-young after seeing a single photograph of his intensely expressive eyes. The sheer, undeniable statistical reality of this monumental, record-shattering double release was so deeply brutal that it officially became the very first and only event in human history where a single artist simultaneously secured the absolute #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100 with a pure, unadulterated classic jazz track, a completely mathematically impossible feat that had not been achieved by any human being in over 65 years, while his movie simultaneously shattered every single all-time global opening weekend box office record, pulling in an absolutely mind-numbing, historically unprecedented $850 million in a mere 3 days, completely liquidating ticketing servers worldwide and forcing massive multi-billion-dollar cinema chains to physically turn away millions of weeping, desperate fans simply because there were mathematically no more physical seats left on the entire planet.
Think about the sheer magnitude of his influence when international vintage vinyl factories had to completely halt production for every other artist on the planet just to keep up with the overwhelming, chaotic demand for V's physical album, literally causing a global shortage of raw vinyl materials that made major financial news headlines for weeks. And consider the absolute frenzy when his movie wardrobe, curated down to the finest detail by his own artistic vision, sparked an immediate, unstoppable global resurgence of classic, tailored 1950s menswear, entirely crashing the websites of heritage tailors and vintage boutiques from Savile Row to Tokyo in a matter of seconds. He didn't just break records, he aggressively and beautifully bent the very fabric of time, forcefully dragging the elegance of the past into the immediate, breathless present, proving that his artistic intuition is essentially a flawless, undeniable compass for global cultural consumption. But the absolute soul-crushing brutality of V's historic rampage didn't just stop at completely humiliating the commercial gatekeepers and comfortably sitting on top of the global box office and music charts. It violently and unapologetically translated into the most massive, critically acclaimed award sweep ever witnessed by a solo artist in the 21st century, culminating in an incredibly historic, deeply emotional night at the Cannes Film Festival, where his chilling, completely silent, heavily expression-based acting performance earned him an unprecedented, continuous 27-minute standing ovation, literally bringing elite, notoriously cold European film critics to profound, sobbing tears, immediately followed by his absolute, undisputed victory at the Academy Awards, where he casually walked onto the grand stage, dressed in a sharp, vintage, tailored suit, and became the very first Asian artist in history to win the Oscar for Best Actor in a Leading Role on his very first major international cinematic debut, all while simultaneously holding a Grammy Award for Best Traditional Pop Vocal Album in his other hand. Can you even begin to deeply, truly comprehend the immense, staggering emotional journey of this incredibly resilient man, starting as the heavily guarded, secretive, hidden member of BTS, surviving the brutally harsh, deeply isolating early years where he constantly struggled to find where his unique, deep voice fit into the aggressive, high-energy hip-hop tracks, battling intense, heartbreaking public misunderstandings about his artistic eccentricities and enduring the suffocating, freezing isolation of his military hiatus, only to aggressively and beautifully return as an untouchable, fiercely confident global titan who effortlessly holds the entire prestigious Hollywood acting industry and the elite global jazz community entirely in the deeply expressive palm of his hand. Imagine the absolute, deeply humiliating despair of the pathetic haters who loved to mock his acting debut years ago in a historical drama, or the arrogant Western music executives who ignorantly claimed his voice was too slow and sleepy for the global market, suddenly forced to watch in absolute, helpless, paralyzed silence as legendary, untouchable Hollywood A-listers and multi-platinum jazz icons literally line up for hours just to shake his hand at elite after-parties, openly praising his relentless, immersive dedication to his craft and proudly calling him the absolute greatest, most naturally gifted artistic chameleon of this entire generation. This level of absolutely staggering, violently elegant, and overwhelming commercial and critical success was the loudest, most incredibly beautiful revenge against every single person who ever dared to box him in or doubt his supreme, undeniable worth, permanently silencing the critics, leaving his fiercely protective, incredibly dedicated fans completely breathless with pure, unadulterated screaming pride, and cementing his golden legacy not just as a mere pop idol or a handsome face, but as a legendary, era-defining cinematic and musical mastermind whose sheer existence demands the absolute rewriting of global entertainment history, proving once and for all that true, eternal art is never bound by modern trends, but is forged entirely by the raw, unapologetic depth of the human soul. But if the cinematic baritone of the group could effortlessly orchestrate the single greatest dual industry takeover in human history, physically forcing Hollywood and the Grammy board to completely surrender their most coveted golden statues to his hypnotic presence, completely breaking global box office and vinyl sales in the process, you have to desperately, frantically ask yourself, what kind of blinding, overwhelmingly terrifying and Number 1. Jungkook, the Golden Conqueror, obliterating the global pop culture matrix. Absolute checkmate. Let's dive straight into the terrifying, reality-bending, and absolutely untouchable universe of our number 1, the undisputed golden youngest brother of the group, Jungkook. A man whose highly anticipated 2026 solo return didn't just break records, but completely and violently obliterated the foundational matrix of global pop culture, establishing an absolute mathematical checkmate that literally forced the entire Western music industry, major global athletic franchises, and streaming conglomerates to officially raise the white flag and permanently surrender their crowns to his absolute godlike supremacy. For over a decade, the most deeply cynical haters, arrogant Western pop purists, and jealous internet trolls desperately tried to minimize his staggering, all-encompassing talent, maliciously framing him as just a heavily manufactured, factory-produced pop star with a pretty face and good dance moves, confidently and ignorantly predicting that his post-military solo career would inevitably plateau, unable to independently sustain the massive, crushing pressure of being the central, defining pillar of the biggest musical act in human history. But what Jungkook unleashed upon the completely unprepared world immediately following the historic BTS reunion was a masterclass in absolute, brutal, and terrifying physical and vocal domination, a breathtakingly massive, multi-dimensional global takeover that flawlessly merged the absolute highest echelons of Olympic-level athletic endurance with a completely genreless, multi-platinum, explosive solo album that simultaneously conquered pop, rock, R&B, and electronic dance music, creating a monumental global phenomenon so deeply paralyzing that it literally forced the Guinness World Records organization to completely rewrite their entire tracking methodology just to comprehend his numbers. We are talking about the completely unprecedented, absolute madness of his historic Golden Ascension World Tour and accompanying visual album, an ambitious, perfectly executed project that miraculously saw him casually pulling off a feat that no human being in the history of recorded entertainment has ever even dared to attempt, officially headlining the massive, incredibly prestigious Super Bowl halftime show entirely by himself as a solo Asian artist, completely without any Western guest performers, while simultaneously dropping his massive 20-track studio album right in the middle of his breathless, gravity-defying 50-foot aerial wire stunt broadcasted to over 250 million live television viewers. The sheer, undeniable statistical reality of this monumental, record-shattering live television event was so deeply brutal that it officially became the very first and only broadcast in human history to completely crash the server farms of Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, and Amazon Web Services all at the exact same synchronized second, triggering a cascading global internet blackout that left social media platforms completely frozen as a verified, mind-numbing 3.8 billion people desperately tried to stream his explosive, high-energy title track the moment his perfectly branded combat boots touched the American turf. Think about the absolute, mathematically insane magnitude of his influence when major global sports brands and multi-billion-dollar athletic franchises literally had to pause their own massive marketing campaigns because Jungkook casually decided to direct and edit his own music videos entirely by himself, showcasing him executing flawless, professional-level extreme sports, from competitive freestyle snowboarding down the dangerous slopes of the Swiss Alps to brutal underground mixed martial arts sparring, all while flawlessly belting out crystal clear, intensely powerful high notes without a single ounce of vocal backing track. He didn't just casually break streaming records, he aggressively and beautifully bent the very limits of human physiology, forcefully dragging the incredibly strict, heavily guarded Western pop industry into the immediate, breathless present, proving that his relentless, terrifying work ethic is essentially a flawless, undeniable weapon of mass cultural destruction. But the absolute soul-crushing brutality of Jungkook's historic rampage didn't just stop at completely humiliating the commercial gatekeepers and comfortably sitting on top of the global Billboard Hot 100 with all 20 of his album tracks simultaneously occupying the top 20 spots, a mathematically impossible feat that had entirely established artists weeping in frustration. It violently and unapologetically translated into the most massive, physically demanding live stadium residency ever witnessed, where he sold out the massive 90,000 capacity Wembley Stadium for an unprecedented 30 consecutive nights, performing a grueling 3-hour, heavily choreographed, rain-soaked masterpiece every single night with absolute terrifying vocal perfection that left elite vocal coaches and legendary pop icons openly sobbing in the VIP sections, completely unable to understand how his vocal cords and physical stamina were even biologically possible for a human being. Can you even begin to deeply, truly comprehend the immense, staggering emotional journey of this incredibly resilient man, starting as a deeply shy, fiercely introverted 15-year-old kid who moved to Seoul with nothing but a massive, overwhelming dream, surviving the brutally harsh, deeply exhausting early trainee years, where he silently absorbed the incredible talents and heavy burdens of his 6 older brothers, battling intense, heartbreakingly public pressures to constantly perfectly live up to the immensely heavy golden title, and enduring the suffocating, freezing isolation of his military hiatus, only to aggressively and beautifully return as an untouchable, fiercely confident global titan who effortlessly holds the entire prestigious Western pop industry and the elite global entertainment community entirely in his fiercely tattooed, incredibly strong hands. Imagine the absolute, deeply humiliating despair of the pathetic haters who loved to mock his English pronunciation years ago, or the arrogant Western music executives who ignorantly claimed he could never carry a global stadium tour completely alone, suddenly forced to watch in absolute, helpless, paralyzed silence as legendary, untouchable Western pop royalty literally begged their managers to secure a writing credit on his album, openly praising his relentless, immersive dedication to his craft and proudly calling him the absolute greatest, most naturally gifted, and terrifyingly complete entertainer of this entire century. This level of absolutely staggering, violently energetic, and overwhelming commercial and critical success was the loudest, most incredibly beautiful revenge against every single person who ever dared to underestimate his supreme, undeniable worth, permanently silencing the critics, leaving his fiercely protective, incredibly dedicated fans completely breathless with pure, unadulterated screaming pride, and cementing his golden legacy, not just as a mere pop idol or a talented younger brother, but as the ultimate, legendary, era-defining musical conqueror whose sheer existence demands the absolute, permanent rewriting of global pop culture history, proving once and for all that when you forge absolute, unfiltered passion with a terrifying, superhuman level of athletic and artistic discipline, you become entirely impossible to surpass.